On Twitter, you called me a subhuman, degenerate, retard fuckhead for not believing in the word of the Almighty God, Jesus H. Christ.
What? No, what? No.
Would you care to defend? Would you care to defend those comments?
What are you talking? Are you having a go at me right now?
I'm having a bit of a go at you right now.
I'm a small squishy bean. Please don't torment me like that.
I'm sorry. All right. For real, though, why don't
I like you a lot, man. I do want to say that from the outset. I want to, just say from the outset, I love your show. I love your streams. I love everything about this, and I'm excited to be talking to you right now.
Oh, fuck. That's really sincere and generous, and you know what? Mutually reciprocated. Let's see if you still feel that way at the end of this conversation.
I'm sure I will.
All right. Why don't you introduce yourself? Hit us the fuck up.
Okay. Well, my only credentials are that I'm a poster. I've been posting since I was 13. I haven't stopped posting since. And that's the real way to do it. I run a shitty little Facebook meme page called Sassy Christian Anarchist Memes. I'm going to throw it right in the stream discussion
in the Discord?
Yeah, hang on a second.
Toss that shit right out there.
All right, I'm going to throw it in.
Meme posters are our shock troopers. I hope you know that. You're really on the front lines down there, okay?
I live in, this shitty small town, so it's I can't really go out and, agitate as much as I would like, but I still try to, convince them, hey, we kind of live in a crap situation. Wouldn't it be better if we look towards something else? I still try to, talk to people and educate them, but this is really all I can do.
Listen, shit posters are how we win the war, okay? It's like the video games, you know? You can carpet bomb and tank rush the enemy control point as much as you want, but you need infantry to actually capture it. Has anyone played what is it called? Call of Heroes? Battalion Wars? I don't know, okay? It's a meme. All right. So there were two things we wanted to discuss. You're a pacifist Christian anarchist. Which means of those three descriptors, two of them run pretty contrary to my values. Would you like to introduce your perspectives on that?
Sure. You can look it up pretty easily. Christian anarchism. It was started by Tolstoy, specifically, at least the modern movement.
Mm-hmm.
However, in my personal opinion, if you go back and read a lot of the early church fathers, I think a lot of the positions I hold aren't in terms of being a Christian. Pacifism was pretty strong up until, of course, they gained power in the Roman Empire. To sort of breach into the conversation as a whole, what we're really going to be getting into, I think that religion can still play an important role on the left. I think that the religious left has been very important in its development and movement. I think you look towards people like Dr. King and Malcolm X, who were both very religious. Malcolm X was Muslim, very deep in his faith, and it was in fact through his faith that he gained a lot of his politics. And it's the same for Dr. King. You look towards him and you read that his policies, his politics, and his faith were very interwoven. And you look in places like South America with liberation theology, and they have very strong communist stance, specifically based upon the Bible, for example. And of course, my best friend in the whole world is Muslim, and he's a communist too. I don't know if he's a communist outright. He's definitely pretty far left. We haven't.
But he's in the ballpark.
Oh yeah, he's in the ballpark. I think that about the conversation you had with Red Pill Religion a week ago, I think that the religious left can still play an important role in how we look towards the future. I still think that really organized religion, I'm working my feelings out on that specifically. I'm still sort of figuring out, what sort of role they could play, if any at all. Do we have any organized religion in an anarchist society? I don't know 100% for sure. I can't say. But what's going to happen in the anarchist society in the future? Who knows? But I still think that religion can still play an important role in all this. There's a lot of communities out there where the bedrock, it's what they have. And, that sounds very trad cat thing to say, but for the left, I think we need to recognize and appreciate the fact that for some people, religion is a big cornerstone in their life. And to hopefully get you in on this conversation now, you like, what does religion offer me?
No, well, hold on. I'm perfectly familiar with the benefits that religion offers society and even the individual. That's not really my concern here. I can break my, I suppose, concerns here down into 3 central points, which I'll list sequentially, and then I guess we can go over them one at a time. For one, I believe that the belief in religion, any sort of religious or supernatural or spiritual belief, enables anti-scientific thought and enables superstition. And when people let themselves succumb to superstitious belief, it leads to them making other irrational decisions that might not necessarily have a good outcome. Even if somebody could prove to me that religious thought had a 100% positive effect on a person's psyche and well-being and sociability, I still wouldn't buy it, because it would still enable them a thought process which would allow them to engage in patterns of thought and behavior, which might, down the line, lead to worse outcomes. We can see this with anti-vaxxers, climate change deniers. We can see these with people who believe in what is it, the water shit, where water carries particulates of everything that's been in it? Prayer healing. We can see this with people who believe that aromatherapy or juice cleanses. All of these people who have ideas that are fundamentally based in superstition and mysticism, tarot readings, horoscopes. I think these things have fundamentally negative outcomes on the human psyche and on human development collectively. So that would be my sort of primo thought number 1. My second one is that I can never trust the intentions of a religious person, ever. Because, under any circumstances. It's not that they're dishonest. It's that their highest priority, by necessity, must be the affirmation of the holy principles that they believe sort of guide the moral standing of the universe. If they believe God has told them to do something, or they believe that something is ordained by God, that is it. If they go against that, there's a moral hypocrisy, or at least a fear of eternal damnation in some religions' cases, which serves as a very strong artificial barrier in favor of them acting on that belief. To put it more specifically,
is it okay if I jump in just for a quick second?
You certainly may.
I will say, for the record, I'm leaning more towards universal salvation personally. And again, that's not something that's hugely contradictory. It's not me being a squishy liberal who wants a happy outcome. Plenty of early church fathers, including Gregory of Nyssa, universal salvation. So I don't personally believe in eternal damnation, and in fact, I would probably agree with you that strangely, I'm agreeing with quite a bit of what you've said so far. At least in terms of the second point of if somebody believes in a higher power, well, then that's it. You can't tell them otherwise. And standard anti-theist argument, say, for example, all of a sudden I believe that God told me to kill you. Obviously nothing could sort of counter that if I say, well, God told me to do it.
Yeah, that's the highest moral authority you can reside upon. I also want to say, by the way, even if you do believe in sort of existential eternal salvation, I would also argue this minimizes the severity of the human experience. If you believe as I do, that is to say that all life is purely material, there's nothing supernatural, and when we die, we're gone, then believing there is an eternal paradise for all humans after the fact can be used as an excuse to downplay cruelty and mistreatment in this life. After all, if I sincerely believe that there was eternal paradise waiting for us, I personally, and at least this fits within my my consequentialist moral system, I wouldn't think it's wrong to murder people without reason. Life is often cruel and unfair, and for many people, continual suffering. To release them from that, I think, if I knew there was an eternal reward waiting for them at the other end. The point that I'm getting at here is the reward at the end doesn't really matter to me. What matters is that people are deferring to a higher moral authority than serving the interests of human beings. And I think that I can't trust people who believe that. I can't trust people who might succumb to the thought that God has told them to lie in order to covet power so that one day they might institute a theocracy. I can never know if a religious person is going in that direction. And the third and final point that I want to bring up, and I will go through one by one. one by one, without question. And every point.
Sorry. Sorry.
Again, no, of course. Every point against my favor, of course. I'm not trying to gish gallop you. I just want to outline sort of the central theses here.
Yeah. You let me go on a bit, so go ahead.
Every benefit we get from religion, I think we can get elsewhere. Also, hold on. I want to shout out a dono because I don't know if it'll show in my recent events in Streamlab. Caustic Soda, thank you so much for the $4.20. It's the weed number. I really appreciate it, comrade. And
I appreciate it. Woo!
And your you might not appreciate the strongly anti-theological message they included, which is, and I quote, every religion in our society can go fuck itself. So
that hurts my fifis.
Right, so we can agree on a part of it. The third point, and this is the simplest one, I think, is that all of the benefits that we get from religion can be found elsewhere. This feeling of purpose and community, I think we can get it without, and I apologize for the loaded language, lying to people about the nature of the universe. I think we can get those same outcomes without the associated negative ones.
Okay.
So with that being said, let's return back to the very first point that I made, which
my
is
brain's a little scrambled right now.
No, that's fine.
Like I said, I'm nervous. This is the biggest audience I've ever talked in front of, so...
Don't worry about it, comrade. I remember my first time on somebody else's stream. A larger figure stream. In regards to the first point that we spoke about, which is to say, being religious enables mysticism and superstitious belief in other respects, which can lead to people making decisions that have negative outcomes on their life. What do you have to say to that? It's unquestionable, the link between religious thought and superstitious belief.
Of course. So I suppose also for the record, I should say that I do believe in the literal resurrection. I'm not like that much of a squishy liberal in that regards. I do believe in the literal resurrection of Jesus. So I suppose you have me on that point.
Good. Don't bitch out. Don't bitch out. I never want to hear that. It's all interpretive. No, I want to hear it. All of it. The plagues, everything. That's what I like to hear.
The Old Testament, I have a lot of mixed feelings on, and really complicated discussion, I think, because obviously as an absolute pacifist, one of the sort of big points is like, how do you look towards the Old Testament where seemingly this village be wiped out and then reconcile that with the absolute pacifism of Jesus? And I do have a book on my Kindle that's 1,500 pages long that gets into that, but I've only got about 100 pages into that, so I can't speak on that regard. But so you're saying that you think any superstitious belief whatsoever could enable other superstitious belief and lead to greater harm in that regard, right?
Yes.
Let's see. What I would say in response to that is a couple of things. I think the first thing I would say in response is that I think superstition as a part of the human condition, I want to express this exactly. I don't think necessarily just because you have some superstitious beliefs in some regard, that doesn't mean you can't believe other things in a much more straightforward fashion. You know, when you look towards the metaphysical and you say, well, I believe this, you know, take me, for example, I say, like, I literally believe that 2,000 years ago there was a man who died on the cross and 3 days later he was raised, from believing, you know, in global warming. I love that chest stroke, dude.
Hey, you pay attention to your own arguments, okay? I'm just teasing the stream. I'm adding a visual element to the audio.
You can't stop me. You cannot stop me from drinking it all in. Anyway, okay, so that, while it is true, yes, that I would even concede the point in a respect that, yes, having some superstitious belief could, in effect, lead to superstitious belief in other regards. However, I don't think that just because I personally believe this, I don't think, like, for example, horoscopes, like, I think they're dumb as shit, but, well, you know, if you want to look at your morning oh boy, is this where I gotta, like, compare my thing to the other thing?
Yeah, it really is.
Oh, because, like, the stars, they don't... For example, my claim is a historical claim. 2,000 years ago, you know, a man was raised from the dead, and can either of us entirely prove or disprove it? No. And you know, you could get me on that and say like, well, you can't prove it entirely either. Sure.
Well, not only that,
but
but
with
you can't disprove a negative. It's impossible to disprove
of course,
the
I
idea
understand.
that someone
I already
resurrected.
understand the point you would be
Right.
trying to make with that. However, with the horoscopes, that is something we could actively measure. I can like do a scientific experiment on horoscopes and like prove that horoscopes don't really work. Whereas with my historical claim about Jesus, like that can entirely be. I think those two are in
Yeah,
separate
well, no,
categories.
the only historical claim that can be verified about Jesus' existence is that he did exist as a Jewish preacher and a carpenter about 2,000 years ago, and that he died at the hands of Romans. Nothing else can be proven, and we can look throughout history and find literally thousands of supernatural claims made by Christians that have since proven to not be true. So I would feel that in terms of like percentage chance of getting a correct outcome, horoscopes are actually more accurate than the prophecies of Christians.
I suppose if you have a large enough sample size and you say something good will happen to Pisces today, I suppose yes, eventually. However, I still don't think that deflects away from the fact that I could do a scientific experiment on horoscopes. That's something that I can actually observe right now and disprove. Whereas you just said, yes, it's a fleetingly small chance, but even from your perspective, the fleetingly small chance is there. Whereas with the horoscopes, I could put that in a lab, test it right now, and disprove it.
No. This isn't how statistics work. What you would have to argue is that, in spite of the fact that Christian prophets have been making shit up and getting it wrong for thousands of years, somehow the Christian mysticism still has some predictive property that the horoscopes.
Oh, well, I had never claimed I never claimed anything about like Christian prophets over the two.
But if you're not claiming that, what you're essentially saying is that because science can't disprove that a magical thing happened 2,000 years ago, that means that that assertion is more valid than something which can be provably demonstrated false today, which isn't really how evidence works. I could make the exact same argument about the existence of centaurs or Cyclops back in the day. Maybe we find some bone pieces that look a little bit confusing. Nobody can prove they didn't exist back then. So kablam, I now have a theory that Cyclops existed back in the time of Odysseus for real, that is now more verifiably true than the outcomes of horoscopes today. But people don't base religions around the existence of Cyclops. I mean, they probably do, but I don't.
I feel like I'm not even sure we're actually disagreeing here. Like I do sort of acknowledge that, you know, it is faith. You know, I do sort of hold the Kierkegaardian as it is absurd. You know, like I said, I probably should have actually said this at the start of the stream. We were talking earlier, and I said I haven't brushed up on my apologetics. I'm not ducking. The stream just froze for me. I'm not ducking this, by the way, to anybody listening. I'm not ducking. I'm just saying I'm not brushed up on my apologetics.
No, I'm not. I'm not accusing you of ducking at all. It's just a difference that I'm interested in exploring. Because my argument here is that in both cases, in the hyperbolic Cyclops example I just gave,
right,
and in you sort of historically affirming the validity of Christian mythicism because you can't scientifically disprove that Jesus was resurrected, yea, back in the day, that these thought processes...
But the entirety of my claim, I do think there are pieces of historical evidence that you can point to and look at. I mean, I got a couple of books here. I mean, I could take the time and go get them and like sort of scroll through them a little bit. Like there are people who have sort of like worked through this and said it is even, for example, Bart Ehrman, you know, famous now atheist agnostic, acknowledges that the apostles probably did believe that Jesus was raised from the dead. At least the apostles probably did certainly believe that, even if, you know, Bart Ehrman rejects the idea that he thinks it happened.
Yeah, but I hardly think that the sincerely held religious beliefs of people thousands of years ago are enough to affirm a belief that fundamentally rewrites the way we look at the universe.
I don't fundamentally rewrites the way you look at the universe. How? Because both of us come here to this table holding probably a lot of similar beliefs in regards to how we should structure our society in terms of like social arrangements, distribution of wealth, justice, ideas of social justice. I mean, we disagree in terms of things like violence and religion for sure. Holding up your finger, but
Because I was pointing at a donation. Again, don't pay attention to the stream. What are you up to?
Sorry, man.
No worries.
You know, I hesitate to call myself a Marxist only because I, maybe don't entirely know what that means. But I do think a material analysis, by and large, history of the class struggle, I think that holds largely true. And I think you'll find a lot of liberation theologists believe that as well. But I just happen to think that 2,000 years ago, there was a dude who, maybe that's a little disrespectful, but I do think there was this guy who 2,000 years ago did lay down these very specific claims. And that's sort of what I base those ideals upon.
I understand that, but you do realize that at the end of the day, there is no standard of proof you could meet that would affirm the fundamental tenets of your religious belief, which means that you rely, as religious people do, on faith.
I would... Now, if we're talking about your standards or maybe some other people's standards, I would agree with that. One of the things I would say is, sure, there are some people out there that I'm never going to be able to entirely prove my religion to, but I think there are some good arguments we could, sort of historical arguments that we could work through. But again, as I said,
well, that's the thing. That's the problem, though. Just because the Bible is speckled with references to events that actually happened doesn't mean the superseding moral authority surrounding it is true. You can make mysticism out of any number of historical events that were actually true. Would you argue then that the Books of Mormon are correct because they happen to be grounded in an actual family that came to the Americas to rediscover their religious passions? Probably not.
I think you're misunderstanding my point a little bit. You said there is absolutely no burden of proof that I could offer to prove my claim. And in terms of historical claims, I would say there's a lot of things I can't prove beyond any shadow of a doubt.
But none of them affirming the existence of a god. Nothing supernatural. That's why it's supernatural. If it was natural,
sure, metaphysical. Sure, it's all about it. Like I said, I agree with Kierkegaard that it does come down to it does require a leap of faith for certain people. Like if I was not raised religious. I should also go on record and say that. I was not raised religiously, and I only started getting interested in religion when I got into high school. Do it on my own. I just read a lot of different books about atheism, theism, agnosticism. I read all those different ones, and I just personally came to my own beliefs that I used to be like a Buddhist and a Christian, but then I sort of moved on from that when I realized I didn't entirely understand Buddhism.
It's surprisingly complicated. You earlier said that you need to take a bit of a leap of faith in the Kierkegaardian approach towards religion, but I disagree with that. What you need to do is suspend disbelief and engage in a mode of thought which is completely antithetical to the way we make decisions in our real world. In our real world, we subscribe pretty hard to rationalism, the idea that empirical, visual evidence is how we determine objective truths. Now, obviously, positivism has sort of seceded since then, and we have embraced a little bit more of a post-structural view of how science functions. But hold on. And we have embraced a more post-structural view of science functions, but there is no rational thought process which could lead you to believe that the entire fundamental structure and origin and moral guidance of the universe can be determined because we can historically verify the existence and the occurrence of a few people and events that took place thousands of years ago. That would require a suspension of every system of thought that we use in our daily life.
I'm not sure I entirely agree with that because...
Could you affirm a supernatural claim using modern scientific method?
That's why they call it metaphysical, isn't it?
Well, exactly. The metaphysical can't be dealt with the modernist approach.
Well, if that's your claim, if you're going down that sort of just entirely new atheist route of you can't use the scientific method to prove that God exists, then of course I agree with that. No,
then how do you prove God exists?
How do you prove God exists? Well, like I said, there's historical evidence for...
For what?
For what? There's historical evidence that these events happened around Jesus.
Which events? That doesn't prove the existence of God. I accept the fact that Jesus was a Jewish preacher and carpenter back in the day who probably suffered religious discrimination and was nailed to a cross for his preachings. I don't think that affirms the existence of a metaphysical entity. I just think he was a historical figure. There are thousands of people who have throughout their lives proclaimed to be prophets and apostles of God who have just died namelessly throughout history. This guy got a bit of press surrounding him. It happened. I don't see how this affirms the existence of God.
Well, I mean, if you're looking me to try to convince you to become a theist, I don't think that's going to happen today.
Probably not.
Like I said, you know, yeah.
But that's the thing. Though. I'm putting you in sort of a logical, not a trap necessarily, but I'm putting you here in a position where you have to.
Right. Here's what I do want to ask you. Let me sort of flip this around you on a little bit. And there's people out there who say Jesus didn't exist at all. I'm sure you're familiar with that small minority crowd who say Jesus was just made up entirely, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say to them, for example, like trying to prove them that Jesus existed? Like, what would you be able to counter them with?
I mean, I could point to historical and anthropological records which verify the existence of Jesus Christ from multiple perspectives at the time he was said to have existed, not just after the fact. Meaning that he probably actually did physically exist as a human being and wasn't just a stooge that got made up 100 years later for people to, like, post hoc justify a series of religious phenomena they believe took place. But I don't think not believing in the existence of a historical figure is anywhere near as pressing as believing in the existence of a metaphysical God. Those are very different tiers of justification needed to sort of uproot.
Sure. I can accept that. I'm just sort of like asking you if you're aware of like historical records, basically.
Yeah, I am. I've gone over them. I used to believe that Jesus didn't exist at all because I was an edgy, like, 13-year-old atheist. But now I'm an edgy 25-year-old atheist, and I'm a little bit more knowledgeable.
And now I'm an edgy 24-year-old Christian anarchist.
Oh,
so
we're the same age, basically.
So, say in response, for example, to radical skeptics who, like, don't believe, an example, for, like, a physical reality. Like, for whatever reason, maybe they think this is all a computer simulation. Maybe they just think, like, this is all a dream or whatever. Like, what would you say to response to them? Because they're saying, like, you're the superstitious one here. You actually think this reality is real.
Well, they wouldn't argue that I'm superstitious. They would argue that they have no way of knowing. And that would be my argument, too. I don't believe that human beings, by nature of our connection to the material world, can make statements on metaphysical existence. And for that reason, I find, like pontificating about it entirely pointless. All we know, all I can prove, all I can independently verify is that at any given moment in time, my consciousness occupies the experiential, physical form of a human body, and that the things around me appear to be real. I don't know that the world exists. I don't know that other people are independent conscious beings. I don't know whether or not I'm in a simulation. However, I think that life gets better for all of us when we treat this as a real world that we have real consequences for. And I can make empirical arguments to demonstrate that. And because I want other people to treat the world that way, I want people building roads and making signs and making blitioblames so I can play the blitioblames. I know that I too need to follow by that sort of empirical metaphysical guidance in order to maximize the well-being of the physical creatures that I spend my time with in this world.
Okay.
But if someone said we live in a simulation, I would accuse them of the exact same hypocrisy that I believe religious people engage in when they try to make statements on metaphysical existence. Can I reach out to you, though?
Yeah, sure.
I'm not stupid enough to believe that the be-all, end-all sort of tenet of religious belief stems from the ability to empirically demonstrate it, okay? I'm not saying that faith as a concept is a fundamentally useless tool. There can be instances where faith can be beneficial, like to have unfounded trust in, say, a friend to overcome a difficult time even though you believe they're going to fail, because that faith can have better outcomes in the long term. However, there are certain types of faith, particularly ones associated with religion and mysticism, that I believe lead people down really bad roads when it comes to making decisions in their own life. Believing in a higher power or believing in like a purpose for bad things that happen to them, mysticism or spiritual bullshit, horoscopes and tarot readings. There are a lot of ways that superstitious belief kind of fuck people over. It's considered to be an actual like flaw in the human brain. Like psychologists and anthropologists talk about how superstitious deference of like natural phenomena held humans back for a long time, because it was a way for us to sort of process and normalize things we couldn't understand or explain.
Sort of the Daniel Dennett argument, isn't it? Rather, it's just sort of moving on to point 2, or are we still on point number 1 here?
The only point that I want to make fundamentally is that even if a religious person was in and of themselves harmless, I just believe that believing in the supernatural, in the metaphysical, leads people down bad roads.
Okay, my sort of counter to that would be, I think a lot of the time when we ascribe supernatural and metaphysical blame to certain actions, I think it can be proven for like more than 95 to 99% of the cases, it's actually the material conditions that people are in. Like I said, I don't know if I would call myself a Marxist outright, if only because I'm not entirely sure.
Comment?
Absolutely buy that argument. I 100% agree that religion is the opiate of the masses. You only have to look at how Christianity was fundamentally transformed after the Roman Empire to see that case. Like I said, I'm probably sure we agree on like 90% of this, because I think Christianity got fucked over. I think Christianity got warped and distorted into something it was not meant to be around 300, AD, when Constantine converted the Roman Empire. I think when Christianity got political power, it was transformed into something it was never meant to be, ever. Like, Christianity was never about holding power over other people, in my opinion.
I think that's totally reasonable. The problem is that you and I assign much greater degrees of severity to the harm religious thought can bring to people, whether or not it's tied to like modern, like incredibly destructive institutional interpretations of religion. Like, I'm a full anti-theist.
Okay, well,
I want to obliterate religion and superstition. I want to eradicate it from human consciousness. That doesn't mean, by the way, that I want to eradicate you or your beliefs. Only that in a broad structural basis, I want these things to be phased out of how humans operate.
You'll ever be able to accomplish that, because you did say that you do think that superstition is a part of the human mind, and the fact of the matter is people are going to be superstitious probably no matter what. I mean, if you wanted to eradicate like superstition, hundreds, maybe even thousands of years, because people are still going to think things like, land a coin, find a penny, heads up, that's good luck. Why do we believe that? I don't know. People always look for patterns. We're pattern-seeking human beings, and we're always going to try to find pattern even when there isn't one there. That's the whole point of sort of like superstition, is that we try to find patterns sometimes where they aren't.
Yeah,
I just so happen.
Oh, sorry.
Pretty much finishing. I just happen to believe that this particular superstition may be right. That's obviously my position.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, go ahead.
I agree that superstition is pretty thetical to human belief. I just believe that it's harmful, and that there are a lot of. I think that's an argument from naturalism. There are a lot of other things that are pretty core to human thought processes that I would also consider to be like distinctly negative. For instance, we have a tendency, particularly men, or assigned male at birth people, depending on how libcucky you want to be today, to feel like extensive periods.
Come on, full libcuck.
Full libcuck, fine. People assigned male at birth, or people blah blah blah. There are some aspects of human behavior that invoke sexual aggression when aroused. For example, rape used to be much more common than it is today, and fuck it, it's still really fucking common. I would argue that the desire to aggressively propagate one's sort of sexual will onto others is a pretty core component of human behavior as well. But that wouldn't mean I would just throw my arms up and say like, all right, well, get to raping, whatever, as long as we're doing the right kinds of rape.
I mean that makes me a little uncomfortable, man. I mean, comparing rape to like a superstitious belief that.
Yeah, the main difference there is that superstitious belief is much more harmful than rape.
Ooh, so. See, this is the problem. I think I don't hopefully want to get too deeply into it, but this is a bit of a problem that I have with sort of anti-theists in general. Like, if you don't mind me poking the hornet's nest a little bit,
mm-hmm. No,
you always try to like fluff it up a little bit by saying like, well, no, I don't actually want to harm religious people. No, I don't actually want to like eradicate religion through means of violence and force or anything like that. But then you still sneak it in there where you say, like, just by virtue of the fact that I'm Christian, even though I would, like, never in my life seek to force my beliefs upon anybody else, go ahead and say, I think that belief is just as harmful, if not more harmful, than rape. And it's like, I'm sorry, like, what am I supposed to make of that? Where you say, like, no, I'm not trying to eradicate you, but you're worse than a rapist for this belief.
Well, I think at an institutional level, spirituality or mysticism are probably a lot more damaging to human society and human livelihood than rape, but I wouldn't assign the same level of moral culpability. I would never judge a person on an individual level for their religious beliefs. And I mean that sincerely. That's not me trying to double talk. For instance, I believe that superstition
No, but it's... Like, I had this sort of same problem, like, to go back to when I was still, like, learning about these sort of things. I still had the same problem with, like, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, the whole lot, you know, the Four Horsemen. I had the same problem with them where they're like, well, obviously, you know, we shouldn't, like, try to hurt religious people. We shouldn't, like, you know, do what they did to us. But at the same time, like, these people are just dangerous, insane. Like, you know, can you believe that they believe these weird, superstitious things? We should try to get rid of them, you know? Whenever I hear this sort of anti-theist talk, I can't help but it reminds me of, you know, like when that turned into reality, when anti-theist people actually started persecuting religious people.
Well, hold on.
If you
Before
want
I
to say
address that, in what instances have anti-theist people begun systemically discriminating against theists?
I mean, you know, USSR, North Korea, even Cuba, you know, for a brief period did persecute. I do want to say, though, I am a Cuban apologist for the record. I do think Cuba is doing pretty well for itself. But, you know, even Cuba at the start exported Catholics. Now, again, I will say with the caveat, hang on. I want to finish it up a little bit. I will say, though, at a caveat, that I don't necessarily disagree with the choice to extradite certain religious people when they attempted that society. I do agree with the what was that liberation theologist's name? He wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I did read it a while back, and he, I think, pointed out that, you know, for as much as liberation theologists are trying to get in on the left action, it is true that religion has been the institution of reactionary tendencies for a long time. So I don't necessarily entirely disagree that, you know, organized religion or religious people may need to, I would say, reformed, I guess, maybe is a good word to put it. But it's when you say, like, well, you know, superstitious belief doesn't have the same moral culpability of rape, but then I really have to press you and ask, where exactly am I being put here? Like,
yeah, I can answer that.
Would you...
First of all, I do want to say that in regards to... Oh, damn it. I should be writing this down. I have a point that just slipped my mind. Hold on. You were talking about the expulsion...
I've read it down. Go ahead. I don't care.
You were talking about the expulsion of Christians from Cuba and the USSR. And then I was going to say...
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, the problem that I have here is that we're still talking about the institutional effects of religion, which isn't really my main problem with it. Even if there was a religion which promoted nothing but tolerance, equality, pacifism, and egalitarianism, I would still hate them and want them removed. Because I believe that metaphysical beliefs are fundamentally toxic. So even if a religion does nothing but good, I would still say they are bad. To me, this is almost a deontological point for me. That superstition is almost like intrinsically a terrible thing. But in terms of moral culpability, I can bring this, if I may, to an analogy. Are you familiar with the author Kurt Vonnegut?
Yes, I am. I keep meaning to read like a complete book of his, but I only got halfway through Slaughterhouse-Five.
Hey, well, Slaughterhouse-Five was what I was going to talk about. Okay, so there's a type of alien species. I'm probably going to mispronounce this. In Kurt Vonnegut novels, he calls them the Tralfamadorians, I believe. There might be a G in there. It's quite a long name. Whatever the case is, this is a species of alien.
Hey.
I'm sorry?
Somebody shout out David Bentley Hart. Thomas Frazier, I gotta say, you got good taste, my friend. David Bentley Hart is my favorite theologian. Continue. Alien, Slaughterhouse-Five.
By the way, while we're talking about this, could you shout out the name of your Twitch channel?
Yeah, I plug it on the meme page sometimes. It's just LuppiJackal. LuppiJackal. That's also my Twitter.
Yeah, give me
So,
your Twitch link in our Discord convo so I can plug you appropriately at the right times.
sure. Let's see, Twitch.
So
I don't have a regular schedule yet because work and all that shit.
So to get back to what I was saying, okay, the Tralfamadorians live life detached from the continuous flow of time. So they exist for a period of time, and they're capable of experiencing different points in their life independent of the chronological order in which they took place. Like, they can choose to experience things as they would an adult or as a child, depending on their whims. They operate.
I like that movie that Philosophy Tube was talking about in his Brexit video, where the aliens have like a non-linear language and they experience time in a non-linear fashion.
Yes,
Do you watch Philosophy Tube?
I do watch I haven't seen that particular one though.
Brexit video. I think it's called "What Is Democracy." It's good. Real good stuff.
The point I'm getting at is that in the stories with the Tralfamadorians, they argue that a belief in continuous chronological time is one of the things holding, and a belief in free will are the things holding back human beings from being part of like an intergalactic civilization. That it makes them cruel and vain and short-sighted. However, in the context of the story, humans are never judged ethically for their inability to engage, to experience time non-linearly. So the argument here that was made, and the same one that I would make, is that much in the same way that humans have trouble distancing themselves from superstition, superstition causes a tremendous amount of harm to their society. But in spite of that, it's not their fault. It is a byproduct of how we are meant to think, or at least how we were designed to think through the process of evolution and what have you.
Right.
Which served some benefits and now doesn't, because we have since superseded it with better ways of explaining the natural universe. I would never morally impugn a Christian or anyone else for their faith, but I will always advocate institutionally for the eradication of the thought processes which led to that faith.
I mean, if that's your perspective, like, superstition in and of itself is always toxic and harmful, I don't suppose I could really disprove that entirely. I mean,
can you understand? And I can think of ways in which you could argue this, that there are ways in which superstition does benefit us, that it enables certain patterns of thought.
Right, we already
conceded belief in
that.
Karma, for example, where people may believe superstitiously that doing good leads to good being done to them, even if it's not true. Maybe it motivates better outcomes. But you can understand my perspective in this respect, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. I understand what you're saying. Like I said, I think we already conceded this point. I mean, if your argument is that even if, you know, somebody is like a perfect angel and always does good, but he does that based upon a superstitious belief, you think that is inherently toxic. I don't suppose I could disprove that. I mean, I'm not sure there's really a way for me to disprove that entirely. I think that's a bit of an untenable position in that sense.
On my position or yours?
I mean, both. I think both of our positions, in a sense, are not 100% provable. I mean, is it really possible to scientifically, in a lab, show with absolute certainty that all superstition, any superstition, is toxic to human beings?
Well, my argument would be that the good things we get from superstition we can get rationally, and the bad things we can only get through superstition, that they're intrinsic to superstitious thinking.
I mean, then it would be dependent on your perspective of good and bad.
Yeah, I suppose. But that's the broad general argument that I would lay out there. We can probably move to point 2. I feel like we've gone over this. By the way, you're performing pretty admirably for somebody who is A, on in front of a large audience, and B, didn't know they'd be getting into a debate.
No, thank you. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I haven't brushed up on this in like 6 years. So, I mean, I felt like if I had read a little bit more recently, because when I became Christian, I sort of moved on from the apologetics and started reading a lot more theology and sociology and a lot of those things. So I haven't really, I haven't brushed up on my apologetics in a while.
If it makes you feel any better, my opinions on the subject also make me a pariah in my friend group. So this is, I too have suffered at the cross for my beliefs. The second, yeah, I know, deliberate minimization. The second point that I wanted to get to, I've forgotten. Do you recall what it was?
Yeah, I remember. I think I interrupted. Oh man. It was something about like the good that religion does in general, but we've already kind of gone over that ground,
So,
haven't we?
the first one, oh, wait. So the first one was the involatility of superstitious belief. And then the
Right.
second one... Damn me.
Down, man.
I can't for the life of me remember. This is why I need to...
The chat will yell at us. They're going to be screaming at us in about 2 seconds.
Well, they're saying it's pacifism, but that was the second subject. There was a second point I wanted to make on religion specifically, but I don't remember what it was, and we probably incidentally covered it in our coverage of the first point. Christ, people are going to be furious when they see this video.
I'm fine with that.
What was I saying? Oh, yeah. I mean, I think we can move to a much more empirical point, and something maybe we can argue a little bit more sort of historically in regards to pacifism.
Right.
Which...
you want to move on entirely to just pacifism?
Would you prefer something else?
I'm fine with that. I love talking about pacifism.
All right. You're going to have to hit me up. You're going to have to hit me the fuck up on this one. So I guess we should probably... let's deliver like our opening statements on this. We're being real civil. I can do mine in like 15 seconds, if I may.
Sure. Honestly, go ahead.
So I agree that harming people is bad. It's something we should seek to avoid. However, I believe that politics is violence. The ability to control other people's lives, to dictate policy and economic movement is already a form of violence, and that there are some outcomes we can only achieve through opposition which necessitates violence. It is in and of itself nothing more than a tool, and a tool well used can produce good outcomes. In this sense, I am, again, a consequentialist. What about you?
I suppose I should lay out what my position is exactly. Personally, I am an absolute pacifist. This means I personally do not believe in using violence ever. I base this, perhaps to prove your earlier point about superstitious belief, I base this on the Sermon on the Mount. It says, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, do not resist the one who is evil with force. I believe in those things. I think that, it just makes sense that if he's speaking to first century illiterate Palestinians, it's going to make sense that he's just going to speak as plainly as he means it. Right. Now, in terms of personally, right, I'm an absolute pacifist personally. I don't believe in violence using for myself. However, I'm still like a sane person, and I still grade all this on a sliding scale. For example, have to look towards how Dr. King saw about violence to see more or less where I land on the violence. Is that it's productive or even good for pacifists in general to waste any time, speaking out against the violence of those who are resisting the oppressors. For example, Black Lives Matter. Even if Black Lives Matter were to go full-on Black Panther Party and just start arming themselves and say we're going to violently resist the U.S. government, I would not waste so much as a whistle saying, I don't believe in that because it's violence. I would not even waste my time with that. A quick point.
I feel that your microphone just got a little bit quieter. Did you move your mouth away from the mic?
No, my mic is... Hang on.
There we go.
Is that better?
Yeah, there we go.
Right next to the mouth. Right next... I'm gonna get on the freaking mic.
Yeah, just fuck me with your voice, honestly. Just get in there.
Even though I am an absolute pacifist, and I personally would never participate in violence, I'm still rational about this, and I still grade it all on a sliding scale. Would I prefer if violence be avoided at all opportunities? Obviously. However, I do acknowledge that for some people, when I tell them you probably shouldn't be violent, they're probably not going to listen to me because they're trying to resist their oppressor.
Mm-hmm. Or be the oppressor.
Right, of course, yeah. Even Dr. King did say, he said something specifically like, if you want rights, you're going to have to demand them, not just ask for them, something like that. I forget the exact quote.
Mm-hmm.
He also said, with regards to violence, I can never raise my voice against those in the ghetto without first raising my voice against the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. My time as a pacifist personally, seeing it from a more or less pragmatic perspective and say, to myself, like, where would my energy be best directed? And I really don't think that we would ever even get to the point where I would even be talking about like the violence of those resisting the oppressors, because simple fact of the matter is it's the governments who are being the most violent in the world today. You know, governments organize war, governments you know, they're the most violent force in the world today, just governments in general. So hence Christian anarchism.
Yeah, well, that's the delicious, juicy anarchic take I like to hear when discussing violence. So I find your position very agreeable here. So you're saying that you are an absolute pacifist in a broad deontological sense, but in the immediate moment, you recognize that the world has not yet sussed itself out into a place where that is a pragmatic means by which society can be dictated. That violence is still the means of law, that governments control their people, and people have to fight back against each other and their governments to obtain the power that they rightfully deserve, at least if we believe in egalitarianism. You wouldn't argue then against violence against fascists or fascism. You wouldn't argue against war against a country with expansionist measures. You would only say that when the time comes, when it is possible, that pacifism should be the rule of the land.
I have a slight caveat to that. I would say that the start is broadly correct, where it is sort of a very broad metaphysical, like just overarching condemnation of violence in general.
Mm-hmm.
However, I don't necessarily accept the idea that pacifism is impossible currently. I do recognize perhaps there are pragmatic limitations to pacifism as a tool.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I would necessarily go so far as to say as I don't think that. Sorry, what was your final position? What would you say at the end there?
That right now you understand that violence is a necessary means by which we achieve that which we deserve, but when the time comes, we can eventually, deign to live in a truly pacifist society.
Hesitate to agree with that, because I personally do believe it is possible to create like an ideal society tomorrow. I suppose this is the optimistic utopian in me. I suppose this is I
would say the near metaphysically faithful in you. You really think tomorrow we could have a utopian society?
Maybe not literally within 24 hours. Yeah, I mean, I do think that it is possible for a group of people to just get together and like say, you know what, fuck this. How about if we do things nicely for a change? I do think it's possible for like a group of people to get together and say, actually, we're not on board with this anymore. Or clock out and make their own. As Bender says on Futurama, we're going to make our own society with blackjack and hookers. In fact, forget the society. I joke, of course.
Well, it's a good quote, and it's a good quote for a reason.
I do think it's possible that, like, just say you and me, for example. I think it's possible for you and me to just, like, get all the people that agree with us together and just, like, say, actually, we're just going to kind of do our own thing. The U.S. government, if you bother us, we're not going to, like, follow your rules. We're not going to pay your taxes anymore. And, I mean, I suppose they could try to violently crush us. I suppose they
probably
would. Probably would. But I do think that pacifism is a very... How do I express this without sort of trapping myself into a corner? But I got a full screen. I can't look at the stream anymore. I do think it's possible that to use pacifism as I do think it's possible to get a lot of people on your side. I mean, specifically what my position is that I personally condemn it. Like, this is a very fine, like, hair-splitting thing, but it's also because I do acknowledge that absolute pacifism is in, like, a weird twilight zone, because very few people follow it, and because of that, like, it like, what exactly it means can be different. I, for example, do believe that you can destroy property.
Okay, good.
as violence.
Anarchy, good.
Yeah, I do think like we should like destroy the banks, get rid of military records, things like that. I do agree with things like that. So like some people might say you're not an absolute pacifist because property destruction is violence, whatever. I don't listen to those people. Those people are fucking idiots, I think.
Right.
I
would arrive
I feel
at the
like
same...
I'm hair splitting too much. I feel like I just want to make sure my position is like very clearly like on this side of things. Like if I had to join a group of people that were trying to overthrow the government, I would not participate in the violence personally, but I would still like, be a doctor or whatever.
Right. I mean, and that would be like
that,
a pacifistic way of engaging with an otherwise unethical system. Yeah, 100%. I do agree it would be possible to form like a pacifistic society in the immediate moment, like now, with a small group of people. But I think we could agree that on a global scale, the millions of intricate ways in which people reinforce a violent hierarchy can't really be dismantled without some kind of violent reproach, At least historically, that seems to be the case. That pretty much the only, like, major exception to this idea, the only time that I can think of a broadly, sincerely pacifist movement leading to social change would be the civil rights movement. Severe social change. Which
I'm a big fan of course.
Right.
We've already said that.
But I would argue that the civil rights movement failed, that it didn't achieve anything. Black people today live either as bad of or worse lives than they did back in the segregation days. The reason for this isn't...
I don't know if I would say it achieved nothing. I would agree that broadly black people's material conditions have not improved that much because...
that'd be a more reasonable way of framing what I just said. I spoke a little aggressively there. I agree with you. I mean, there are ways in which they benefited. We now have a legal and ethical principle or a precedent for establishing the autonomy and equality of black people. That's a huge thing, But in terms of the material consequences, it seems like, the liberal establishment can give token service to the ideas of egalitarianism.
Dr. King spent his final year, fighting for the material conditions. Like he was obviously shot as a union protest for the city sewage workers, I believe.
Yeah,
that's where he was shot in Tennessee.
Even a lot of people say Gandhi was nonviolent, but in reality, the Indian independence movement had plenty of violent wings that posed that played a huge part in the liberation of India from British colonial rule. But I agree with you principally. I do disagree with you on your take on concerning property. I do consider property destruction violence. I just think that it can be good violence. So we arrive at the same conclusion there, I think, through different interpretations, through different semantical interpretations of the language. Right. The point that I'd get at, though, and I really think we 100% agree on this, but I just want to nail this down because I'm really glad. Normally when I talk to like radically pacifistic people, they're fucking idiots, but you clearly have a well thought out position on this.
It's just me personally. Like, I'm not asking anybody else to join my side, least of all, like, people who are in a position like I have had to go through. I don't want to say it too loudly, but I should say, like, content warning. Like, I have had to pull through with my pacifism despite the fact that I was sexually assaulted, and I can acknowledge that it's a very tough position to uphold personally, like, let alone to tell other people, like, first I would have to like check if they're Christian or not, because like I said, I think the position of absolute pacifism is only tenable if you have a metaphysical belief in the first place. Like, if you're an absolute pacifist and you're a pure atheist materialist, I don't know what to tell you. I think that's a stupid position to uphold. Like, absolute pacifism and materialism, I'm sorry, those two don't go together.
Wait, is that true? Is that true? Are you memeing me? Wait, am I being memed on?
No, I'm not memeing. I'm like saying in full sincerity.
Wait, you don't think there's a way for a secular person to arrive, like, to morally arrive at the conclusion that it's like a deontological wrong to do harm?
Pacifism, no. Pacifism, yes. I think pacifism is entirely possible, but absolute pacifism, like no violence whatsoever, I don't think that's possible.
I think that you could arrive at those positions from a secular perspective, depending on the axiomatic values that you sort of build upon.
From a pure materialist perspective, and after death there's nothing?
Yeah. Right? Because all you would have to do is argue...
For a materialist to believe that you don't have a right to defend yourself if somebody is killing you? right?
You could definitely arrive at the conclusion that you shouldn't hurt other people, even in self-defense, secularly. Yeah. All you have to do is place not hurting people personally, deontologically, above the right to personal autonomy and safety. There are deontologists, secular ones, who believe that.
Well, I guess that's true, but I think that's a bit of an untenable position because you're, for a pure materialist perspective, even if you were to say personally, like, well, I hold not hurting other people above bodily autonomy, the sort of traditional argument goes, you surrender your personal bodily autonomy when you try to violate somebody else's bodily autonomy.
Yeah, but that's very much a value that's rooted in one's belief of like self-determination, autonomy, and individual rights. There are traditionalists, secularists. Excuse me. There are traditionalists who are secular who deontologically assign an aversion to violence above any practical consequence of not engaging in violence, and I think those people would be every bit as pacifistic as you.
I'd love to talk to those people.
I am certainly not one of them. I quite like violence conceptually. I like to know that I live in a society where people can fuck me over and I have no recourse, and that I can do the same to people who deserve it. I feel like that's a good. Oh, one moment. Yes.
I was just curious. I don't know if you talked about it already or if I missed it, but does this dude have any takes on like inaction?
Show off that chest rogue.
My partner is curious as to your position on the assertion that sometimes non-participation in action can itself be a form of violence.
That is a very interesting question for me, and that's one I wrestle with a lot. Well, I suppose the first position I would have to common talking point, and this is the big thing that I always try to stress. Pacifism, even absolute pacifism, does not mean non-action. It doesn't mean you're not going to do anything. Anybody who says pacifism means being passive doesn't understand the history of pacifism, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, I already referred to it earlier. I think you can destroy property, for example, to try to stifle or resist against other people. It doesn't answer the question more directly, though. I think I would probably agree with her that non-action is probably a form of violence. In some cases, obviously.
Nice. Okay, I think we have pretty comparable views on not necessarily on violence and pacifism at least, but on the ways in which violence interacts with the necessities of building an ethical society, which is nice. It's nice to hear that. Usually when I talk to pacifists, they have this really like oblique doing bad makes bad sort of take with no regard whatsoever for the consequences of one behavior.
No.
But that's deontologist for you.
I think probably my favorite example of like absolute pacifists in action was probably during the Vietnam War when, what were they called? The Seven or something or other? The Catholics who broke into the draft office and burned all the cards. I think that's an excellent example of like absolute pacifist resistance. I think on Fight Club, destroy the credit card companies, get rid of, government records, that kind of thing.
Well, that I agree with, but here's a question for you, okay? Here's my closing question on this topic specifically. How would you feel about the possibility of breaking into an office and burning draft cards if those drafts were us enlisting in, say, World War II, a war against a clear and unambiguous threat to global security?
That's always the hardest one.
I don't have an answer to this one, by the way.
I keep meaning to read Dorothy Day's essay specifically on World War II because she wrote like a dozen of them explaining what exactly her position was. And I think the general crux of her argument was that this kind of society always destroys itself. Nazi Germany. I think I have not read the essay entirely, but I think Dorothy Day, the crux of her argument about World War II and the reason why she was against even that, even though it was probably like the one instance of a clear and just war in probably entirety of human history, the crux of her argument, generally speaking, was that kind of society always destroys itself. Fascism is a death cult. It always destroys itself whether resisted from the outside or not, because it just can't sustain itself.
But
you
it doesn't
sustain
hurt to
fascism
help
for
it
a long
along the
period.
way. I mean, they could conceivably kill many millions more people if not interceded.
Yes.
They would have been able to complete
Right.
the Holocaust, to advance to finish their like dissolution of France, probably to take
like
over
I said,
Spain.
I'm not against resisting them in certain ways. Like there are plenty of, you could have destroyed the Nazi rail tracks. You could have, destroyed some of their supply lines. There's plenty of ways, I think, materially that you could have resisted without necessarily engaging on one-on-one human violence.
But what if destroying the supply lines and the train tracks kept the Nazi soldiers from the Wehrmacht from supplying their soldiers on the Eastern Front with food, and those actions directly led to the starvation of hundreds of thousands of Wehrmacht in the snow?
That's always the tough question, isn't it? You can't predict your actions all the time. You can't predict which action may necessarily be the best one. However, I think in that case, you're talking about an instance where... See, my position on, like, soldiers in general is sometimes a little bit tough because let me think of a good example. Like, in the early, I hate to keep going back to this, but, like, pre-Constantine, there was of Christianity. Like, there was no consensus on what theology was, and so there were people who called themselves Christians who were like Roman soldiers. And so you have that kind of thing where, like, how am I going to calculate my actions here? Like, should I destroy the food supply lines of, the German soldiers at risk of, like, them starving? But then you still have to sort of turn around and point to the fact that, well, the fact remains that they're the oppressor in this case. They're the ones who signed up for this action. They're the ones who started it, not to use the schoolyard
well, it
byline,
is relevant who the aggressor is, for the most part, I think. Or a lot of people would consider it relevant.
In the case of Nazi Germany, though? Point to the fact that materially we put them in a lot of debt in World War I. That doesn't even begin to anywhere near justify, like, Holocaust.
Yeah, but then you would argue, like, reciprocal violence, right? Like, for instance, if, like, my girlfriend, irritated, throws, like, a pen nib at me, I think I'm, like, fair in throwing a stuffed animal at her back, as long as it doesn't have any pointy plastic bits, okay? I made that mistake when I was a kid, and I busted my brother's head open, okay? There was blood everywhere. But as long as it's a perfectly soft plushie, I get to throw that back. But, like, I couldn't, like, bust out my gat and, like, put 9 bullets in her chest, So I think that reciprocative violence does have an element of sort of scale that needs to be taken into account. But broadly speaking, I do agree. The sort of instigatory factor is not. I think a lot of people overestimate it. I'm not some fucking, like, non-aggression principle dude, bro, who believes that yeah, exactly. Okay, I think that this is probably the most productive conversation I'm going to have this month, which is really nice. I probably need to start getting into yelling at videos that were made.
Can we have 10 more minutes at least? 10 more?
Sure. Is there a particular topic you'd like to go over?
To talk about the animal issue. That's
I forgot about that. Yeah. Okay, no, absolutely. Yeah, hit it.
Okay, so I do have a couple of ideas about the animal issue. Like,
well, first introduce the animal issue, because no one knows what the fuck you're talking about.
Well, one of the positions of Christian anarchism is most Christian anarchists are vegetarian and vegan. Sort of like my sort of take on it is, like, one of the bigs of third wave feminism is that the first oppression we learn is oppression of women.
Mm-hmm.
Slightly alternative view on that, and I think oppression of animals is in fact one of the first oppressions that we kind of learn as human beings. We're taught because we're bigger than them, we're stronger than them, we get to do whatever we want with them. And I think that an ideal, like, left anarchist society will have to be mostly vegan and vegetarian, depending on somebody's personal health issues. Like, there's a very, I keep hearing so often, but there's probably, like, maybe 1% to 2% of the population that we do need to have some kind of animal products available to for particular health reasons. But I think that a truly good anarchist society will definitely be vegetarian and vegan, if not, like, vegan altogether.
Yeah, I mean, you're not gonna. Oh, sorry.
Tolstoy that so long as there are slaughterhouses, there will be battlefields, because you cannot say to yourself, like, I have a right to do with this cow what I want because I'm smarter than it, I'm bigger than it. Well, maybe not bigger, but you
They
know,
are
I
quite
can do whatever.
scarily large, yes.
You know, I don't think you can sort of reconcile the idea of like not doing violence and harm to the most vulnerable beings in our society and then also turn around and like have a burger
Yeah,
every day
look,
or whatever.
you're not going to find disagreement with me here. I subscribe entirely to vegan ethics. I think that the meat industry that we've got going on right now is tantamount to a holocaust, probably even worse in scale than the one which is typically referred to by that name. Yeah, no, I 100%
You're
subscribe
saying
to...
that, but you just went full on there.
I'm sorry?
From using kind of language like that, but you just did it for me.
No, wait, I'm an edgy boy. Yeah, I'll say it, Holocaust. Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I'll lay it out. I think that the ethical harm being done right now by the meat industry, the factory farming industry, is probably a greater ethical harm than the slaughter of 10 million people by Nazi Germany. Gays, cripples, Jewish people, gypsies. I subscribe very firmly to vegan ethics. I can't imagine any ethical system that could, like, principally justify the ascension of human rights like that high over animal rights that it's okay to just torture and slaughter them for convenience. I would argue that that animals may not necessarily benefit from freedom in the same way that we do, because they aren't really cognizant of their surroundings and can't really change their environment in the same way that we do. We don't really know what an ideal life is for a cow. We don't really know what it is for a human yet either, but we're trying to figure it out. But we don't know, like, is a cow as happy living in a pastured farm with a big fence, big fence, mind, nice grass, and, you know, they get the milkies now and again. Is that, like, an ideal life for a cow? I don't know, and until I do know, I can't make sort of affirmative statements on the sort of the best way to treat animals, but I can say concretely that it's a moral wrong to just, like, slaughter them for personal convenience. I guess maybe I could see an argument in, like, hey, what if this animal's old and is probably going to keel over in a month anyway? Might as well kill it and make use of the meat. And then you would have to argue, like, okay, is there a sliding scale in the amount of harm done by ending its life early? Is there any harm done in that respect if it's already suffering as opposed to the benefit we get from the meat? It's a really, really, really fucking complicated question, but I like to talk in terms of policy and law. And policy and law has to draw hard lines, not soft ones. And since the line as to when it's okay to, like, kill an animal for their meat is probably soft towards the end of the animal's life or in case of suffering or whatever, then I would make the argument that on a legal, principled, sort of institutional basis, we should be discouraging meat consumption to the greatest possible extent. Now, when lab-grown meat comes around, whoo boy, I'm 180ing on that position in a fucking minute. I love me some chicken tendies. I love me some fucking fettuccine alfredo. I want my fucking tendies, and I have to get them from a lab. You know what? That's fine. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I mean, I really can't think of anything I disagreed with that stance. I mean, lab-grown meat I'm a little tentative on because I'm a little bit worried that may lead down a sort of path of, like, slavery for a while where we tried to, like, regulate it and have a very welfare-based sort of environment. I am, like, an animal rights abolitionist. I think we need to legally recognize animals as, like, non-human persons for them to have any hope of treatment in our society. Like I said, small hesitancy with lab-grown meat because, like, I'm worried, like, that will be a good excuse just to keep harming animals on a big scale, but
well, it wouldn't. Really would you consider it a moral wrong for like factory grown lab meat? If we, like, breed a cow to have, like, literally no higher thought process, so it's basically just like a comatose person with no brain, no thoughts.
No, I would not even let that happen. That sounds fucking terrifying as
shit.
But
it wouldn't be able to feel pain or have any thought process, right? It would just be literally meat growing independent of any sort of consciousness.
See, my problem with that is, like, how are you going to get to that point? You're going to have to do a lot of cows where you're going to have a lot of in-betweens. They're trying to do that with chickens right now, actually. Like, I read an article a little while back. They're trying to like sever a particular nerve in chickens or pigs, I think, so that way they don't produce a particular stress hormone. And I just look at shit like that and I'm thinking like more terrifying and even more scary than it was before.
I agree it's conceptually terrifying. Don't get me wrong. The idea of like mass breeding millions of animals that have no brains and they're just big sacks of meat that we hook up to tubes. But I mean,
from there, I would have to go with the environmental angle because, there's a lot of environmental problems with raising animals.
True, but you could say the same thing about us existing. And ultimately, environmental health exists to serve us, or at least I think it does. I don't give a fuck what we do to the planet outside of how it serves human interest. Because I don't know, like, who knows? There could be a volcanic eruption or a meteor or whatever. The Earth is constantly evolving and adapting to the changes that get brought to it. This time, we're just the change. I only really care about the environment insofar as it serves our needs. That doesn't mean I really like damage to the environment, only that I think it's kind of amoral. I would want to minimize it, but it's possible that we could, develop our relationship with the environment to the extent that we're no longer really harming it, you know what I mean? Like our CO2 scrubbers are doing enough work that we're not really advancing global warming, and the amount of like land and resources we're consuming to pump into the lab-grown animals aren't really doing any damage to the planet. That's possible, but it's not so much for me about the pragmatics as it is the broader ethical question, and I would be okay with like the slaughter of animals that don't have a consciousness, because at that point it's really just, it's just meat. It might as well already be dead, right? It just has the biological processes that are keeping it growing, but it probably wouldn't taste very good.
Pure cloning, like just using cells to clone, I think that I would be okay with. A full-grown animal but doesn't have like a brain or a consciousness, or is just a vegetable. Firstly, you would have to like get all the in-between animals, and that would be a lot of suffering that I wouldn't be in favor of.
Fair.
And you have the end result where you would still have people like killing animals, and I have I suppose, like I said, I sort of refer back to the Tolstoy point of so long as there are slaughterhouses, there's probably going to be battlefields. I don't think killing an animal is necessarily healthy for the human psyche, even if it's like a vegetable. I don't think that would be, you only have to look at the rates of alcoholism, drug abuse, and even like family abuse in slaughterhouses. A lot of those people are really fucked up in the head because they spend all day just like surrounded by blood and dead animals, and it really fucks with their head a lot.
You could make the same argument about therapists in EMTs, just because the job of working with it is damaging to the human psyche doesn't mean it's a moral wrong.
But that's the different story, because in the case of EMTs and therapists, those are necessary jobs, whereas opposed with this,
I wouldn't say they're necessary. They exist to serve human utility, so does meat.
But in the case of EMTs and therapists, you're talking about human utility that will depend on their entire life, whereas with meat, you're talking about utility that's more just a want.
It all boils down to happiness for me. We want to have a functioning arm, we want to have a healthy mental state, and we want to have our chicken tendies. I don't really go by the needs. You could assign like a hierarchical system
and you would put that particular want over the psyche of people in slaughterhouses.
They can choose not to work there. Keep in mind, if we're talking about an ideal society, this would be an anarchic society. So hopefully there wouldn't be an element of coercion in determining whether or not a person would choose to work at a given place.
But I suppose then we would have to sort of go down a very long rabbit hole of like, can you really even choose that sort of thing? Like, can you make the rational decision, I'm going to risk damaging my psyche all for the sake of...
I don't believe in making other people's decisions like that. Okay, wait. Okay, here's boiling it down to its moral crux. What if we had a massive factory in which we had lab-grown meat? The resources necessary to grow that meat weren't damaging the environment to any extent that should be worried about. Everything was sort of relegated within a permissible exploitation of available land and resources. And no people man the facility. There are software engineers that just make sure everything's up to snuff, but the actual process of feeding and growing, slaughtering, and partitioning the animal meat, all of that is done automatically by a series of machines and conveyor belts. Really, it's just a gigantic concrete, metal, and glass building, and into it goes researchers, and out of it comes millions and millions of pounds each year of delicious lab-grown meat for which no conscious entities suffered. Would you consider that factory in and of itself a bad thing?
Abstract hypothetical where absolutely no conscious entities suffered, and we have these weird hypothetical animals that somehow have skipped all the terrifying experiments where animals, I'm sure, suffered horribly to make one that doesn't suffer.
Mhm.
In that weird, insane, abstract hypothetical that I don't think could happen, yeah, I suppose.
Okay. Then from that point, it would just be about me trying to make that a possibility. And I believe it is. Someday. Not right now. But
I
someday.
mean, most of the lab-grown meat I've seen is just like straight up cloning a hamburger. I've never seen one where they like try to make a vegetable cow.
Hey, don't make bets against the human ingenuity, okay? If we manage to survive this global warming shit.
If I could just say that, I would prefer to stick to straight up cloning hamburgers as opposed to like making vegetable cows.
Okay, here, new thought, okay? What if we find a neo-Nazi and we cloned them and we just eat them for the rest of time? It's okay if they suffer in the process because they're a neo-Nazi. So we basically get infinite delicious meat. Maybe they'll be like a really burly kind of like neo-folk, Nordic neo-Nazi, and we can just eat them for the rest of time.
Sure, man. Eat
All
the
right.
Nazis, I guess.
Hey, listen, I have tremendously enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Ooh, we should do it again sometime. I feel like we agreed on a lot.
Yeah, more so than I expected to. I typically have bad discussions with pacifists. Here, one more time, I'm going to post links to your Twitch channel in chat. Could you repeat the name of your Twitch channel and what you do there?
Yeah, just the LuppiJackal, LuppiJackal. I already threw it in the stream discussion in Discord, but I can throw it in there one more time.
Gotcha.
I also run a meme page on Facebook called Sassy Christian Anarchist Memes, where I just kind of shitpost all the time. Thing on the end caps. I also have a Twitter. You can follow me if you want, if you care to hear my thoughts on anything.
Support your fellow comrades. Hey, I really appreciate you coming on, okay? I hope we're able to do it again in the near future.
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely love this. Huge fan of yours again, by the way. Keep doing what you're doing. Like, you got more free time than I do right now, because now you're trying to make this a job. I don't even know if I'll have a regular schedule ready for the summer, because I normally work like 70 to 80 hours a week, so it's fucking brutal as shit.
Gotcha. Well, first... I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
First of all, I am sorry for the wage slave suffering. I genuinely am. I do hope that with time we are able to more ethically and more pleasantly divide up, partition our schedules.
All right, I guess I'll about do it. Thank you very much, guys. I hope you were all friendly to me because I'm a squishy bean, and if I read mean comments, I start crying immediately.
I actually saw a pretty overwhelmingly positive. Initially, there was like the Christard shit, but about 5 minutes in, that all kind of faded, and I think everything was pretty pleasant from there.
Yay!
Have a good one, comrade.
You have a good one too. I gotta go to the store now and get crap because my roommates are yelling at me.
Good luck.